Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this week's critique session. My apologies for last week. I was abroad and I just didn't get home in time to put together a video, but obviously we have a video today, so that's a good thing. The bad news is, well, for some of you, is that this will be the last critique session for a while. Alister's taken a little bit of a break from the critiquing, and to be honest with you, you need more than one person to do the critiques because it kind of offsets each other's point of views on different aspects of images, as you've probably noticed quite a bit between Alister and I. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to continue with a weekly video, but what I'll be doing is addressing problems that people might be having with the post-processing. So what I'll be doing is I'll be taking viewers' raw files and also a JPEG of the finished image that they've processed, and I'll be trying to address some of the problems that they're having. Now, before you start sending me or inundating me with tons of images, what I'm going to do is start off with my members page. And for those of you that aren't familiar with my members, it's a subscription-based program put through YouTube where members pay a monthly subscription. But even with that, that doesn't guarantee that I'm going to get to everybody's photographs. As you can imagine, both Alister and I got inundated with all kinds of photographs, and since we're only tackling 1 or 2 photographs a week, you can see that there's just no way we can view every single image, and that'll be the same with these post-processing. But if you are adamant about uploading a file, and hopefully I'll get to it, then for sure head on over to my members page. For my current members, I will leave a message on the message board where you can upload your photographs and all the information that you need for me to look at them and hopefully get round to making a video about your question. So I hope that's kind of clear. Thank you ever so much for all of you that sent images, and I know quite a few people put comments down, well, how do I send an image? And I never really got to anybody. We just had so many photographs to choose from. We probably have enough images for the next year. So yeah, there's no shortage of photographs. But we'll see how this goes. I think it might be quite interesting. It'd be interesting to look at other people's photographs and delve into their problems and hopefully help and address some of those issues that they're having. Right, on to this week's critique. This was an image sent in by Greg Noakes. I noticed a few processing problems with this photograph, and I tried to address some of them. So hopefully you'll enjoy this video, and as always, let us know in the comments down below what you think of the video, the format, and if you enjoy it, please be sure to give me the old thumbs up. It's always appreciated. And lastly, this Sunday I will have another video coming out, so stay tuned for that.
Okay, now this photograph by Greg I picked because it is a scene that I would often photograph. It's a beautiful waterfall, has some fall leaves in there and these reflections in the water, the bubbles. There's some great subject matter in here, but it does have a few issues with the processing, and that's why I chose this image. Now, of course, again, these are all personal choices that we make, and perhaps this is how Greg wanted this photograph to look. But this looks a bit too HDR to me. You'll notice that the shadows, there's some really deep blacks in there, but then there's no kind of tonality between the blacks and the highlights. It's just black and then details. Like there's detail throughout the image. And you've probably heard this from a number of photographers, including myself. You know, it's nice to have details throughout the photograph, but that's not necessarily always the case, that you need to have details throughout the photograph, because by doing that, you're bringing up the shadows and kind of toning down the highlights, and then the image looks somewhat flat. And then if you add contrast to that, then it has contrast, but it doesn't have any depth. It's all on the same plane. Now, the HDR look was very popular perhaps 10 years ago, and some people still like it, but it was never really a fad that I really was drawn to. It just looked a little odd to me. So what I find with this photograph is that it does have that kind of HDR look where we don't have deep shadows and tonalities through the image, but also the colors are a little bit saturated. Like if we look at the greens here, the greens are electric green. Also, the blues are a little bit too blue. The reflections, I think the saturation has been upped just a little bit too much. Finally, when it comes to the composition, I find that the top of the waterfall is cut off just a bit too harshly. There's no room for this waterfall to kind of fall into the frame. And perhaps that was done on purpose. Perhaps there's something beyond the waterfall that's quite ugly or doesn't really fit in with the frame. And I've done that with my own photographs where I've cropped in quite tightly to eliminate something, but it ends up just not working. The only way you can really eliminate things in the background is by trying to elevate yourself somehow so that you're looking more down on the subject than across. I like the rocks, and there's a lot of elements in here that will pull you into the frame, but I just find that this is just a little bit too tight for my liking. So there's a few things to work on here. I'd love to see the raw image of this, or the raw file, and kind of get a comparison of what we're looking at here. But I do think it's a lovely scene. I think there's potential here, and I would definitely keep working at it because I think that with this composition and some careful processing, I think you could come away with something really quite special.
So this was an image that Adam chose, and I think it was the first image that was actually submitted to us for critique. And when I look at images again, I always think to myself, why did the photographer point their camera at this? I think this is an important question in photography, is why did the person point their camera at it? And I think it's a very obvious subject. I think we've got this lovely stream. There's these kind of late fall, early winter leaves. There's a nice bit of colour in the water there. The fall itself is very attractive. The composition in itself, I kind of like. There's a nice pyramid in the bottom here that kind of anchors the scene. The flow isn't taking us out of the frame, which it so often can with this type of photography. And the luminosity of the back falls drags us through the frame pretty successfully. I would say that there are different ways to critique photographs. My personal preference is to look at feel. How does the image feel? What is it saying to me? How is it changing my mental state? And this photograph to me feels as if it's a little too, it's like it's trying too hard. It seems as if there's too much clarity, particularly in the back here. I'm looking at the histogram here and I can see again that there is clipping. And one of the things to notice is that there's a lot of clipping in the back, particularly that back left-hand side, and also some clipping under the stones here. If you study painting, one of the first things we study is that there's a thing called the transition of blacks, which is that blacks under foreground subjects will be darker than blacks in distant subjects. And even though this isn't a terribly long way away, it wouldn't be like that. There's just a definite sense that the brain would show us something differently. So if I lift the shadows in the back and open it up a little bit, there's a little bit of clipping in the waterfall itself. But instantly now, that feels a little bit further away because the only clipping is in the foreground. So that transition of blacks is such an important thing. The background falls felt very harsh to me. And if we compare them side by side, you can see that just by lifting the blacks at the back there, there's a softness now in that back waterfall that was absent originally, and the back doesn't feel as heavy and oppressive. Contrast and luminosity and saturation are all things that are going to catch our attention really strongly. They have a massive impact on us. And looking at the overall clarity of this scene, again, it just feels a little too as if there's just a little bit too much clarity. It just feels a lot more than life, if that makes any sense to you. So I'm just going to take a little bit of clarity globally off the scene, and then I am going to add a second linear gradient here, and I'm going to lift the blacks a fraction and open the shadows just a tiny bit. Because what I'm trying to do with all of these adjustments is soften the scene. I'm just trying to take away the edge of it. I'm trying to take away the aggressiveness of it. The other thing that I think that is in the top there is the water feels a bit blue. We're not seeing these blue tones in the foreground water, but they're very present in the back there. And I just wonder again if taking a little bit of the blueness out of that water and neutralizing it a little bit is going to make it feel less eye-catching and less sort of, it's very dominant. So I think what I've tried to do so far, and you can see just subtly here between the right side and left side, the left side of the original felt very harsh and very kind of as if it was just trying a little bit too hard. And all the adjustments I've tried to make, whilst being somewhat minor, have created this sort of accumulation of effects to soften the scene somewhat. The other thing that's worth noting here is that little things like that tree root up in the top left-hand corner there, that diagonal is very eye-catching. Triangles are very powerful subjects in themselves. We can see how powerful this front one is as sort of pulling us into the frame. And this little triangle up in the top left-hand side is something that I would clone out because I believe it's a distraction. I can do it very messily, just using the tools that I have here in Lightroom. That's obviously not going to be a very tidy job because it was a very dirty clone, but you can just see that by removing that triangle, it's made things a little bit better. So all in all, I think there's a lot to like in this scene. Overall, I think it's a nice composition. I think it's obviously a very attractive place and it's a very attractive subject, but I just felt it was trying a little bit too hard and dialing things back, even if it's taking away some of the vibrance, just to lessen the impact of everything. So hopefully, Greg, you find that feedback useful.